President Trump entered the recent weeks grappling with a geopolitical quiet storm. Behind the scenes, intelligence and diplomatic signals converge around one unsettling fact. Iran is not only advancing its nuclear profile, but appears to be deepening covert military procurement ties with China and Russia, potentially undercutting US influence and leaving Washington scrambling. From the Oval Office onward, American officials are asking how the world arrived at this moment and whether the United States was blindsided by a rising axis that mixes old adversaries and resistant states. Across the diplomatic map, Iran's defiance, China's tacit complicity, and Russia's opportunistic posture are all intertwined in a strategic feed chain with profound implications. The intelligence firm Dryad Global recently published a maritime tracking analysis that paints a sharply alarming picture. According to the firm, Iran has been exporting crude oil in an extensive clandestine network of flagged tankers disguised with front companies and false identities in exchange for advanced Chinese military hardware, among it long-range air defense systems of the HQ-9B variant, missile guidance modules and drone production components. This shadow barter route is reportedly circumventing conventional sanctions mechanisms that the United States and its allies have relied upon for years. This is happening at a moment when Iran is advancing its nuclear program. The IAEA in recent months reported that Tehran has sharply increased its stock of uranium enriched to 60% or more purity, just below weapons-grade thresholds. The global diplomatic community sees this as a serious marker. The country now inches closer to breakout capacity. In parallel, China and Russia have publicly rallied around Iran's claim to nuclear and strategic sovereignty. In March, the two powers issued a joint communiqué backing Tehran's right to peaceful nuclear energy and calling for the lifting of unilateral sanctions. All options of pressure or threat must cease, declared a joint statement read by China's Vice Foreign Minister Ma Jiaoxu. Against this background, the US finds itself at a crossroads: either respond to the evolving reality of an Iran-China-Russia axis or risk watching established deterrence frameworks unravel. As one senior US official put it, if we don't see this axis coming, what else are we missing? President Trump's own public positions reflect both caution and urgency. He has restated that all options are on the table with respect to Iran's nuclear ambitions, while simultaneously offering diplomatic channels. Some analysts argue that Washington is pursuing a two-track approach: renewed negotiations with Tehran, combined with pressure campaigns and military signaling. For Iran, under President Pezeshkian and led in foreign policy terms by Foreign Minister Araghchi, the calculus is evolving too. Tehran appears to perceive opportunity. The US is distracted by multiple fronts. Sanctions fatigue is growing, and China's appetite for oil and strategic leverage is insatiable. Even as Iran faces economic strain, the trade-off logic, oil today for weapons tomorrow, is one Tehran seems willing to risk. The contours of this dynamic pose several questions for US policy. Has Washington underestimated the speed or depth of Beijing's and Moscow's engagement with Iran? Is there a structural shift underway that places Iran back at the heart of a Eurasian strategic realignment? And what does it mean for the Middle East, arms control architecture, and global non-proliferation norms? Behind these high-stakes questions lie a number of concrete developments. First, the alleged oil for weapons pact cited by Dryad Global is not merely theoretical. That report states that more than 470 tankers, many registered under shell companies flagged under obscure jurisdictions, have been used in recent months to shuttle Iranian crude. The report also claims at least one shipment concealed an HQ-9B air defense system within oil barrels bound for Tehran. If accurate, this implies a matrix of supply chains that evade sanctions while delivering state-of-the-art gear to Iran's armed forces. For Washington, this raises the spectre of Iran not only developing more capable air defense networks, but also strengthened drone and missile forces, which could be destabilizing across the Gulf, the Levant, and beyond. Second, Iran's relations with both China and Russia are increasingly transactional and strategic. Russia has already signed on for multi-billion-dollar deals to build nuclear power reactors in Iran, a $25 billion contract announced in September 2025 to construct 4 Generation 3 nuclear reactors in Syrik. China, meanwhile, appears to be shifting from passive investor to active military industry partner. In addition to the alleged HQ-9 systems, Chinese arrays of drone and missile guidance technology are reportedly in play, sharpening Iran's battlefield and regional strategic options. Third, Washington's negotiating posture with Tehran remains paradoxical. On the one hand, President Trump has publicly indicated openness to a new nuclear deal. On the other hand, the United States has reimposed secondary sanctions, expanded its maximum pressure campaign, and signaled readiness for military contingencies. In March 2025, Trump sent a letter to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, signaling willingness to restart talks, setting firm deadlines and threatening consequences if Tehran failed to reciprocate. The first indirect round of talks occurred in April in Oman, led by US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi. Yet the suspension of direct high-level engagement with Shia Iran has given Beijing and Moscow space. They have filled the vacuum not only diplomatically, but by deepening strategic ties with Tehran. For Washington, that means the possibility of a new axis converging far sooner than anticipated. One of the more troubling implications for US interests is the potential divide between conventional global arms control architecture and what is happening in these covert supply lines. If Iran obtains more advanced anti-air and missile defense systems, it could blunt the strategic edge of US and allied forces in the region, shifting the strategic balance. For countries in the Gulf and in the Levant, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, this is not a theoretical exercise. It impacts air defense, missile deterrence, and strategic planning. From Trump's vantage point, this scenario demands serious recalibration. The president has emphasized the need to deal robustly with both China and Russia in a multipolar environment. He has voiced plans to resume nuclear arms control talks with them and to ask them to slash their defense budgets by half. But Iran's evolution complicates that ambition. If Washington is now lagging behind a Sino-Russian-Iranian trilateral realignment, the strategic window may be narrowing. And for Washington, caught between peace talks, missile defense, sanctions, and a volatile Middle East, the margin for maneuver is getting thinner. Within the US defense and intelligence community, the immediate focus is on verifying whether the Dryad Global claims hold up under independent tracking and sanctions enforcement mechanisms. The question remains, are the tankers truly carrying weapons, or is this an intelligence overreach? Some officials caution that maritime deception is difficult to assess in real time. Others warn that the pattern fits emerging supply chain logic we have seen in Iran's regional proxies. Equally, US allies are reacting. Israel, which has long viewed Iran as the greatest strategic threat, is watching closely. Its leadership has warned that a more heavily armed Iran, with better air defenses and drone forces, would raise the cost of any potential strike on Iranian nuclear sites, thereby complicating Israel's deterrent calculus. Gulf states, similarly, are assessing whether their bilateral defense ties with the US are adequate to offset Iran's potential capabilities. Meanwhile, Iran's leadership appears to be shifting its posture. President Pezeshkian and Foreign Minister Araghchi are publicly projecting moderation, talking of diplomacy and economic relief. But privately, the regime appears to be hedging. As talks with Washington drag on, Tehran is using alternative channels with China and Russia to upgrade its strategic toolkit. That dual-track strategy gives Tehran leverage. If the US deal falls apart, Iran has additional partners waiting. In that sense, the headline you asked about, Trump in the dark as China and Russia arm Iran in secret deal, is less sensationalist than it may first appear. The structural dynamics align. Iran is acquiring strategic hardware, China and Russia are deepening ties, and the US is pursuing diplomacy while watching from a defensive posture. Now consider some direct lines captured in the transcript that resonate. One such key statement, "We didn't see this coming." With attribution in the original voice, that line speaks volumes. Embedded in the context of supply chain surprises and strategic inflection, that phrase underlines how many in Washington feel caught flat-footed. Another, "This network runs under our radar." That gives a vivid image of the covert tanker fleet, front companies, and disguised shipments. For the United States, the strategic imperative is threefold. One, to enhance real-time intelligence and maritime monitoring to detect the covert fleet. Two, to tighten sanctions enforcement and block front companies. Three, to re-energize diplomacy, but from a position of strength, ensuring any deal with Iran addresses not just nuclear enrichment, but the weapons procurement dimension across China and Russia. There are risks. If the US becomes purely reactive, the strategic initiative slips. If diplomacy is pursued in isolation of the arms procurement issue, Iran gains negotiating leverage. If China and Russia continue to deepen ties with Iran unchecked, they may restructure regional military balances in their favor, and for the United States and its regional partners, that represents a long-term strategic shift, not simply a tactical distraction. In sum, the United States is confronting what could be a strategic surprise, not just an emboldened Iran, but a coordinating role by China and Russia in Iran's armament. For President Trump, this means the time for choice is now. Engage aggressively or risk being left behind. And behind this, a question looms. If weapons-ready Iran emerges from this incubation with Chinese and Russian support, what becomes of the US posture in the Middle East, of deterrence, of arms control, and of influence? At its heart, the message is clear. Covert supply chains, strategic realignment, and multilateral diplomacy are intersecting in a new phase. President Trump, the White House, and their global partners cannot afford to treat Iran, China, Russia as separate threads. They are weaving a web. Whether the United States steps up, steps in, or steps back will determine not just the next negotiation round with Iran, but the strategic architecture for decades to come.